Daisy had always believed that winning an argument was important, that getting the last word could prove her point. But she had no idea how her words would affect Raymond. In the heat of the argument, she said something that seemed to sting more than anything else. "You argue too much for a man. No wonder you're so small down there." As soon as the words escaped her mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a loud explosion of anger or insults. Instead, there was a heavy, suffocating silence that followed. Raymond didn't shout back. He didn't even respond with frustration. He simply froze. His body stiffened, his jaw clenched, and his eyes darkened, not with rage, but with something deeper. It was hurt. Deep, searing humiliation. Daisy didn't understand the weight of what she'd just done. Raymond stood still for a few seconds, then quietly walked away. Daisy waited for him to come back, to shout, to argue like they had done countless times before. But this time was different. This time he didn't return. The silence stretched between them, suffocating, unbearable. The following morning, when Daisy reached for him, she found his side of the bed untouched. She assumed he just needed some space, maybe he'd come back later. But as the hours passed, she began to feel an unsettling sense of unease. Raymond, who had always been there in the past, was now completely withdrawn. She searched the house, finding him in the guest room, sitting alone on the bed, distant and withdrawn. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He was just empty. Daisy tried to reach him, asking why he was sleeping in the guest room, questioning if he was still angry, but his responses were nothing more than quiet, indifferent answers. The more she tried, the more distant he became, and the more it felt like something had shattered between them. Desperate to make things right, Daisy attempted small gestures to show she cared. She cooked his favorite meals, hoping the familiar comfort would ease the tension. But he barely touched his food. She left little notes, tried to strike up conversations, but he barely acknowledged her presence. No matter what she did, the distance remained. The silence between them began to feel like something permanent, like it was no longer about just a fight. It was about everything that had been building up for years. Daisy had always believed that arguing meant they were still connected, still invested in each other. As long as they fought, it meant they cared. But this silence was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, suffocating. It felt like a piece of their relationship had already died. What Daisy didn't know was that her words had touched on an old wound for Raymond, one that he had carried for most of his life. He had always been self-conscious about his size, a deeply rooted insecurity that had followed him through his teenage years. The teasing in high school, the rumors, and the indifference of those he cared about had scarred him. His last serious relationship had ended with a cruel remark from his ex who said, "You just don't satisfy me." That had broken him. He locked those feelings away, buried them deep inside, and built a facade of confidence. But with Daisy, he had let his guard down. He thought he had moved past those insecurities until that night when her careless words ripped that wound wide open again. Daisy hadn't realized what she had done until it was too late. Her words had reopened an old pain, one that Raymond had hidden away for years. The silence that followed was more than just a response to the argument. It was the sound of him pulling away from her, from everything they had built together. Days passed and Raymond's withdrawal grew deeper. Daisy tried to fix things, but nothing worked. She apologized over and over, tried to make amends in small ways, but it was clear that nothing was reaching him. The distance between them seemed insurmountable. Daisy tried to convince herself that it was just a rough patch, that eventually, Raymond would forgive her. But deep down, she knew that something had shifted beyond repair. One evening, Daisy walked into the guest room and saw Raymond packing a suitcase. Panic gripped her chest as she rushed toward him. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. Raymond didn't answer immediately. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was unreadable, his voice steady yet heavy with truth. "I don't know if I can get past this," he said. Those words cut deeper than any argument could have. Daisy had hoped for anger, for some kind of explosion, but this quiet uncertainty was worse than she could have imagined. Tears filled her eyes, and without thinking, she blurted out, "I love you. I messed up. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. Just tell me what to do." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, hesitation, conflict. But when he spoke again, it wasn't a promise, nor was it forgiveness. It was just a painful truth. You can't take back what you said, and I can't unhear it. His silence after that was louder than any words. But then he added, maybe I don't want to walk away. Not yet. It wasn't hope. It wasn't a resolution. But for Daisy, it was all she had left. Raymond didn't leave that night, but the damage was done. The road to healing would be long, and Daisy wasn't sure if their love would survive it. She had never believed that some wounds couldn't be healed, but now she knew that some scars ran too deep to erase. Their marriage wasn't over, but it was fractured in a way that could never be fully repaired.